one of the beauties about this show for me is the positivity of the show, how the wonderful stories that have come from all the guests have showcased the region in this incredibly positive light.
I find a lot of guests tend to use this as a time to reflect.
I think a lot of people who have come into the studio, so to speak, are people who have been asked a lot of questions or have been interviewed about very specific things to do with their careers.
Hello, Malak. How are you?
I'm good, Chirag. How are you doing?
I'm still coming to terms with the fact that the year is over.
I know. I can't get over the fact of the speed of this year. It's pretty scary, actually, and it's been a weird year. But the speed of it is just unreal.
I mean, I don't have a better way of saying it, right? I think it's just been a whirlwind.
It really has.
And there's so much happening, I think, all at once, which is very, very good stuff. But it also means that the time to stop and reflect is kind of not actually happening.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, we're just running,
Yeah.
and there's no time to just stop. Yeah, so it's been a bit strange.
But we're here today to talk and attempt to reflect on at least the sort of the second half of the year, so to speak.
So I had an interview yesterday for this season, for the end of this season, and it was such an interesting conversation, and it really sat with me for a very long time. And I'm still thinking about it, actually, because it was quite profound. And it's with a very well-known actor.
So stay tuned.
Exactly. That's coming out in the new year. And, he's a very thoughtful person, and we had very similar trajectories. And so we found ourselves discussing very interesting questions about identity, which I know has come up repeatedly on many of our seasons. And it's always an interesting discussion, and it's always a discussion that doesn't have an end point. It's sort of it just keeps rolling. You're never at the end where you say, okay, I know now all about identity. You just never do. So it was one of those conversations that was quite challenging.
And I mean, it's been a theme, even on the show as well. Like previously, I mean, Hala Gorani comes to mind, for example, where it's something not only that she's talked about, but now she's written a book about it in terms of just kind of how that identity has fused everything. I think for most of us in the region, that's it's a pretty interesting sort of let's say thread, right? That kind of both influences who we are and kind of helps us. In terms of, some of the work we're doing.
I think further afield, though, Chirag, as well, going even further than that, I think this year has been so tumultuous and so revolutionary because of the Gaza war. And I think questions of identity are being posed all around the world, whether you're Muslim, Palestinian, Jewish, American, British. These are questions that are becoming very fundamental to everybody, I think, and it's really the gaze has really changed, and the gaze has really shifted, and that was part of our conversation yesterday about how there has definitely been a momentous shift happening, whereby Arabs are finally being seen in the right light. And I know that our show is not political, and we've made a point of not being political, but these are questions of fundamentally who we are, and these questions have come up repeatedly over the last year, regardless of who we've spoken to, regardless of where they're from, and regardless of their industries. There's been a fundamental shift that's happened, whichever side of these issues you sit on. But it's profoundly changed people, and it's profoundly changed how they view themselves and how they view the world and how they view themselves in the world. It certainly had a profound effect on me, and it's something that I'm still processing, and I think a lot of people are still processing because we're still in it. So we're not through it yet, and I think you need some hindsight in order to be able to understand it. But we're in the midst of a profound, like a change that's happening that, that's going to fundamentally change everything. As you and I speak today, we are a day or two after the fall of Bashir al-Assad. For a lot of people, what's happening in Syria, it's being seen through the prism of 2011, all the uprisings and the revolutions, and everyone's happy and excited and a new Syria, but a lot of people are also very wary and very nervous, and knowing that the euphoria very often leads to a counter insurgency, more crackdown. So you never know where this is leading. And if we've learned one thing about the Middle East, it's that it's unpredictable. You can bank on, the path not being smooth, and it's anxiety inducing, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only fair, right, that everybody feels a bit cautious about kind of the news that's coming in, because
Yeah, exactly.
the other thing, you were talking about kind of the questions of our own identity, the questions of identity around us, the question of what's happening around us. Also, it's and this has come up a few times, right? The question of how we are viewed from the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's also been another ongoing thread. And I think there's a lot more awareness, even locally, regionally, about that, and how that's looked at. We'll just touch on the fact that I know you've had sort of an entire panel and discussion around some of this stuff recently, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, but it is a question, I think, that is still unfolding and unpacking, and I think even the media and journalists are still finding their place in a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, from the point of view of the media, we're all scrambling, aren't we, to
Yeah.
figure out what's happening. But I think it's going to take a long time to figure out what it all means. But yeah, we had, going back to your point, I was kindly invited by an alumni guest of our show. So Hatem El Akil, who was who was on the show this year, invited me onto his show. And this is the beauty of podcasting and being in a region which is so interconnected, and also being in a region where podcasting is really relatively new, and it's a very nice community of creators. And so he invited me onto his show, and his show is slightly different. So it was a panel. The focus of the conversation was looking at the Arab voice and how Arab media is seen abroad, outside the region, how it's evolved, and what it means to be in the Arab media today. And on the panel was myself, Becky Anderson from CNN, who was another alumni, and this wonderful young voice from Saudi, who is the editor in chief of Arab News, Faisal Abbas, doing amazing work in Saudi, showcasing the incredible leaps and bounds that the kingdom is going through. A very eloquent man, and it was a really, really interesting discussion. I think the big takeaway in all that we're doing and all that we're looking at and all that the region is that we're not a monolith, and we're not one block, and we're not one people, and we're not one religion, and we're not one color, and we're not one creed, and all of that. We're different. Each country has its own makeup, its own heritage, and yes, we share a lot of commonalities, but someone living in Oman doesn't necessarily have much in common with someone living in the mountains in Morocco. There are a lot of differences. There's a commonality, but I think we get lumped into one big pack because it's convenient for Western media to look at us that way. But I think, if anything, this year has shown us just how unique we are and how different we are, and there's a lot of promise that's going to come out of all this misery. Of that, I'm absolutely certain, and I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. I think there's been a massive awakening that's taken place, not just among us, but among non-Arabs and non-Middle Easterners who are finally seeing the truth about what's happening around us. And as I've said many, many times, if I zoom back into the podcast itself, one of the beauties about this show for me, and it's a total byproduct and it came as a surprise, is the positivity of the show and the how the wonderful stories that have come from all the guests have showcased the region in this incredibly positive light. And we're no different to any other region. We have our success stories, we have our role models, we have our incredible people doing incredible work. And that's probably the one thing I'm the most proud of, actually, now looking back on 4 years. We've been going for 4 years, Chirag.
Well, which also brings me to the what I was thinking about, which is the importance of kind of telling our own stories, right? And I know that's something that drives you. I know it's something that drives me as well, in just bringing to light. But when you talk about these incredible stories, and by the way, they were talking successes and failures and pivots and learnings, right? So it's the whole picture, but doing it from the nuance that perhaps we get better than maybe someone who isn't based or hasn't been in the region, for one thing. But I think even taking that away, I think it's just important for each part of the world and all of us to kind of be able to tell our own stories. Podcasting, of course, is a great space to be able to do that. But I think all of this is just showcased to me as well, that importance of that kind of mission to tell our own stories, be able to chart that path for ourselves, right? And I think, one of the things that we're already seeing, I think we've seen that trend happen over the last few years, but I think we'll leap ahead as well, is you'll start to see more and more, and let's put them as creators, right? I mean, I don't only mean like media and journalism. I think in just largely creators and storytellers, more and more coming out of the region, with their own perspective, with their own unique sort of story. And it's great, as you mentioned, it's been 4 years being able to tell sort of these different stories, shine that light, and share that positivity, right? There are, as you said, incredible things happening here.
Yeah. And 4 years when I started this, and you and I started our concept design, our concept analysis, and assessment more, in summer of 2020. So it was the beginning of COVID, and I had approached you. Wasn't it 2020?
Yeah, it was 2020.
I think it was.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And you and I had a lot of back and forth about the theme, how to do it. I was a total novice. I didn't know what I was doing. And you very gently and kindly guided me through all those early, concept phase. And then we got the show up and going early in 2021. And we've been nonstop ever since. We've had 2 seasons a year. And what's really incredible about the show for me is how people pay it forward. So people who are on the show or like the show will help me get the next season's guests and the next and the next. So it's been very much a word of mouth kind of experience and enterprise. And people have been so generous with their time and their contacts, and they've really opened up their contact books and have been very, very helpful in introducing me to so many people. And it's been fantastic, and people are excited for this kind of storytelling. There's a need for it, and there's a thirst for it. And I think, one thing that's very well known about podcasting as a medium is that long form storytelling element about it, which is so magical, and means that, yesterday's interview, I'm going back to that same interview again. We sat and chatted for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't happen in any other medium. When I was working as a journalist for a magazine, and I had to do interviews, I would be in and out. They didn't have time. I didn't have time. I had a set of questions. It was kind of impersonal. It was kind of superficial. And that's not what this medium is. This is very much a one-on-one, an intimate kind of experience. And that's very much what attracted me to it in the first place. And this ability to really, dig down into someone's life, and get them to open up and get them to really speak from the heart is really what's been quite magical about this.
And that's not to say that there isn't a place for all of these other mediums, whether you look at TV or just radio or whatever. I think there is there's space for all of that, right? I think that there is something, of course, to be said about the quick consumption. So I can just get to know like the highlights real fast and move on.
Yeah, of course.
But I think when you want to actually get to know somebody, and that doesn't have to be a celebrity, right? It can be an entrepreneur, it can be any kind of person, an artist, as we've said. And you want to understand, what motivates them, what can we learn from them, right? And we are starting to see. I mean, we just talked about sort of the space for journalism, right? But it's not only that, right? We've had obviously business leaders, artists. I mean, just recently, right? Now, we're all talking about kind of how they view their industry, how they view technology, how they view their space in a what is a new world, right? And that's not only a regional thing; it's also a tech thing and an AI thing and all of that. You really can't. There's so much nuance in that conversation that you can't just, you can't get a 2-line answer out of what someone like an Omar Al-Sahi thinks about AI, right? Like it's actually a 15-minute answer, right? And I think that's again, like you said, I think the ability to be able to do that is wonderful. I think, the on-demand nature of it allows us to be able to do that. We are always still conscious, right, about, how long our episodes are, and we don't want it to be kind of this 3-hour thing necessarily, but I think the fact that it is a relaxed, casual chat where it isn't about we're not trying to get them in a spot, right? The idea is to actually get to know them and open that up. And we've actually had a couple of guests this season comment on that, right? Because they haven't done sort of these long form interviews really.
Yes.
And they've finished by saying, okay, wow, that was longer, but it was very different from what I thought it could be, right? And allowed us to also reflect sometimes. I mean, I find a lot of guests tend to use this as a time to reflect on their journey.
Well, also, I think, Chirag, I think a lot of people who have come into the studio, so to speak, are people who have been asked a lot of questions or have been interviewed about very specific things to do with their careers.
Yeah.
And it's very narrow in scope,
like achievement driven versus
exactly.
the background.
Or number driven, or annual report style. So for example, Haysam Matad from the Intercontinental Hotel Group is very well versed in speaking to the media, but it's always very much about the hotel, the achievements, and so on. Omar Al-Sahi, very similar, from Amazon Egypt, very, focused on the business at hand. And the Khamis sisters, the wonderful Khamis sisters who are running Oriental Weavers. These are people who are very used to being interviewed, but it's always very targeted, very business driven. And for them to be able to sit back and just relax and talk about their lives and how work forms part of their lives, but is not the only thing in their lives, for them was refreshing. I mean, they all commented on it, on how it was relaxed, it was fun. And they ended up, discussing things that they hadn't discussed before. And I think sometimes they were even a bit surprised by what they ended up saying. They might have divulged more than they wanted to, but they were happy to in the end. So things like that was kind of fun, One thing we announced at the beginning of or earlier in the season was that we are putting together a sort of a walk down memory lane with some of our older alumni guests. And so I've been having these really, really fun conversations with some of our guests from season 1 and all the way through to season 7. What's ended up happening is, once we've covered the, what's been happening in their lives since we last sat down, we've jumped into this quick fire round. And it's something that we devised, and it was something that we devised actually primarily as a social media tool, so that we would have some fun content for all the social media accounts that we have. But the fun thing about it was the reaction of each of the guests, because they just were all over it. They jumped into that with, head first, with enthusiasm and excitement, and they just took it for what it was, as a fun thing. And their answers are hilarious. A couple of times I was surprised. I thought I knew what the answers would be with all of them, and I was with some, but there were others that were really, really threw me. And actually, in typical podcasting way, those what was meant to be a quick fire round in some cases ended up being the start of another question. So
Right.
in a couple of these instances, Hali Hali, for example, we went off on a tangent about something that was meant to be a one-word answer, and off we went into something else. And then yesterday too, in yesterday's interview, and then Amy Moefi, we went off on several tangents, and so things like that was quite fun. And this is a segment that's going to be opened for our members. So this is a shout out to our audience. If you're not a member of the show, become a member. It's very little to subscribe. It's a very minimal amount to pay, and you will unlock an incredible array of extra content. You'll get extra bonus with new guests. You'll get this incredible new segment that we're putting together, which includes alumni content. And then you're also going to get extra with me, which is something that the team have been pushing me to do for a very long time. For those of you who know me well, you'll realize that that's out of my comfort zone, where I have to be more in the spotlight. But that's something I'm being encouraged to do, and so we're putting together a lot more content of that kind, and that's going to be for members. So sign up, and you'll be getting access to a lot more content.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that also, right? I mean, we've been kind of having this conversation for a few months now, actually, probably since the summer, in a more aggressive way, right? In terms of kind of the evolution of the show. We touched on at the start of this, right? We've been around for 4 years. And there were a couple of themes that kind of, I think, came up quite a lot. So obviously, one of them is that, with a lot of guests who we interviewed at the start of this journey, right? And because, you're in touch with them and we hear from them and we still follow them and so on, we know that they're doing new things and interesting things. And so we wanted to kind of see how we could fit that back and maybe get a chance to capture some of that interesting stuff and their insights, of course, into industry. And then also, we're also been pushing this year, especially a lot more into video and doing, a lot of different things around video. This is also a nod in case you haven't checked out our YouTube channel. You can do it, and you can get all of these interviews there. Over the last few months, you have our full episodes now on video, right? And that's going to continue into the new year. So this was
also, Chirag, it's important to point out that the full archive of the entire show is on YouTube.
Yes.
So the earlier seasons, we have slightly edited versions of the full episode. All the audio is on YouTube now as well. So it can be your gateway to the show. I mean, for everything.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's something to keep in mind.
We're seeing more and more now that if nothing else, and even if they don't necessarily continue to listen on YouTube, people are discovering shows through YouTube, right? That's kind of the primary, or becoming one of the primary places where people get to know more about podcasts. But I think also for us, it's also been this kind of gradual evolution into adding more and more video and being able to do a little bit more with that. So we've always done video, I mean, to some degree on social media. And so this was a nice way to kind of go back to our old guests, to actually get them on video in terms of full conversations, and then showcase some new and interesting stories, even from people that have been loved on the show for a very long time. There are some of the guests that we have that you've been speaking to are guests whose original episodes are still being heard, even a couple of years after after those episodes aired. So I think that's also a nice kind of that was what kind of one of the reasonings there. But then touching on the video thing as well. So even with new guests that you've been speaking to, and I know you've touched on a couple of them, we're gonna aim to have even more video coming up, both for members and non-members. So stay tuned.
We want to also just wrap up the year by thanking our sponsor, EFG Holding, who have been incredible partners of What I Did Next. Wonderful sponsors to have. And we look forward to working with them again in the future.
Yes. And of course, as always, right, none of this is possible without you listening in to us, sharing your comments and feedback. So please continue to do so. Of course, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a comment on Spotify. You can now leave us a comment on YouTube. DM us on social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, elsewhere. I know now this season we've had a lot of people comment on LinkedIn as well. So there's we're trying to be we're trying to be where you are and try to reach you wherever you are. So please feel free to, and we love hearing from you, right? So that's please continue to do that. But thank you.
Yeah, and one more thing to add to that is if any of you have people you would like to hear from on the show, if you have ideas for guests, then please share that with us as well. I'm always on the lookout for incredible stories from the region. And it's also a shout out to particularly North Africa, because we are always on the lookout for more stories from Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya. These are areas that I'm trying to get more stories from. So if you're from the region, or if you are connected to that area, please reach out, share who you think would be a great guest, and we would be very, very happy to look into it and have them on.
So this is, of course, a big thank you to all of you for joining us all through 2024, and looking forward to reconnecting with you in 2025.
Great. And I'm looking forward to Christmas. My son is returning from college, and we have a fantastic holiday season planned here in Egypt with him and friends and family. And so I wish you all a wonderful holiday season. And this is my dog Twix, and she also wishes you a great holiday. Take care, everybody.
Should I be worried that I might get replaced as co-host? Because between me and Twix, there's no competition
absolutely.
here. Right?
There's no competition. She wins. I'm afraid, Chirag, hands down.
That's okay.
So you have your work cut out for you there.